everyone, this is Kala from Mission Citizen, and today I'm going to be teaching Lesson 4 on the executive branch. Okay, so this is the point at which, if you haven't done so already, go ahead and go to the Mission Citizen website, so www.missioncitizen.org, and go to the Student Resources tab and print out the quiz for Lesson 4 and go ahead and complete that based on the information you learned last week in Lesson 3. And then once you have completed that quiz, pause this video, do the quiz, and then come back and I will go over the answers. Okay, so now assuming that you've done your quiz, I'm just going to go ahead and jump into the answer key. So for question number 1, the answer is Congress or the federal legislature or the House and Senate make federal laws. Any of those answers will work for number 1. For question number 2, the 2 chambers of Congress are the Senate and the House of Representatives. For question number 3, the House of Representatives has 435 voting members. For question number 4, U.S. representatives are elected for 2 years. And for question number 5, the current Speaker of the House is Nancy Pelosi. Okay, moving on to question number 6. My representative is, now hopefully by this time you should have looked up your representative so you'll know exactly which one of these 5 it is. If you live in the Portland metro area, it is most likely Earl Blumenauer or Suzanne Bonamici, but you're going to want to double check that. And you can find out where to do that on our last lesson, on the lesson 3 in that PowerPoint. Okay, for question number 7, there are 100 U.S. senators. For question number 8, senators are elected for 6 years. For number 9, U.S. senators represent all of the people of their state. And then for question number 10, Oregon senators are Jeff Merkley and Ron Wyden. Okay, and then I think we have just one more question. For 11, some states have more representatives than other states because they have a larger population. And if you say that in different words but are getting across the same meaning, then that answer will also be correct. Okay, so now that we've gone over the answers to the Lesson 3 quiz, we're just going to go ahead and get started on our new information. So to recap what we learned last week, we learned that there are 3 branches of government, including the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. So today we're going to be talking about the executive branch in more depth. So the executive branch. The executive branch enforces and executes the laws. Now, essentially what that means is that the executive branch basically just creates a lot of little rules and guidelines under broader laws that are created by the legislative branch so that the government knows how to carry those laws out and has more specific rules about how to do that. So the president is the leader of the executive branch, and the vice president and the cabinet are also part of the executive branch. So we're going to talk a little bit now about presidential elections. And remember, you need to be writing down the information in bold on the note sheet that you can print out from our website. Same place you would have found the quiz. So we elect U.S. presidents for 4 years. And presidents cannot serve any more than 2 terms, so 8 years total. Presidential elections occur every 4 years on the first Tuesday of November. So there'll be an election going on in November of 2020 because we're on one of those every 4 years. And then after a president is elected in November, the newly elected president, which is often called the incumbent president, takes office a few months later in January. And then US citizens must be 18 years old or older to vote for president, and that's also true of most other elected government officials. There are some exceptions to this. For example, depending on the state you live in, people who have a felony conviction may not be able to vote potentially while they're incarcerated, or depending on the state, maybe even for the rest of their lives. So there are some exceptions, but for the most part, this one holds true. Okay, so if you have all of those bolded answers written down in your notes, we're going to move on to talking about the Electoral College. Now, this is not going to be specifically covered on the naturalization exam, but it's an important thing to know to understand why US elections work the way that they do. So US presidents are not elected directly by voters. It's a common misconception that they are, but actually when we vote in presidential elections, we're voting for members of what's called the Electoral College. And these members are known as electors, and those electors vote for presidential candidates. So electors tend to vote the same way that the citizens who voted for the electors had voted, so they'll generally vote for the same person for the most part. And usually the winner of the popular vote, so the majority of votes, wins the election. But sometimes, like in 2000 and 2016, the candidate who ends up winning the popular vote, so the person who wins the majority of voters, doesn't actually win in the Electoral College and doesn't become president. So because that's happened twice in the past 20 years, a lot of people are kind of reevaluating whether the Electoral College is a good system, because two of the past three presidents have been elected in an election where they did not win the majority of Americans' votes. So many people believe that's wrong and think that the Electoral College should be changed, but there are also people who believe that the Electoral College is a good way of determining who becomes president. So this is just to kind of show that a little bit better. This is what the Electoral College map looked like in 2016. So even though Hillary Clinton won the majority of votes, you see on this map that a lot of these states look red, and it says 306 next to the name Trump. You need 270 electoral votes to win, and you can see that Hillary Clinton did not get that number, and President Trump did get over 270 votes, so that's why he became president. Okay, so now we're going to move on to presidential vacancies. So if the president can no longer serve for whatever reason, if they pass away, if they become mentally incapable of serving, if they're impeached and removed from office, any sort of situation like that, the vice president would become president. And if some highly unique, unusual situation occurs and both the president and the vice president can no longer serve, then in that case, the Speaker of the House would become president. And that could be a very unusual situation because oftentimes the president and the vice president are both of the same party, but the Speaker of the House might be of a different political party and might have extremely different political views than the current president and vice president. So it doesn't really happen, but if it were to happen, it would likely be a pretty dramatic change in the government. Okay, so now we're going to move on to powers of the president. So the president is commander-in-chief of the armed forces, which basically means they are the highest in command when it comes to matters of the military, and they are able to make final decisions in matters relating to that. Presidents are also able to make treaties with other countries. Those treaties have to be approved by Congress, however, and they can nominate ambassadors or court judges or justices. And finally, presidents can sign bills into law and veto bills. What vetoing bills essentially means is that if Congress were to pass a law that the president disagreed with, the president can basically refuse to sign the bill, and then it would go back to Congress, and they would have to get a higher number of votes in support of the bill in order to make it a law if the president vetoes the bill. Okay, so make sure you get that bolded information written down. And now we're going to move on to the president's cabinet. So the president's cabinet includes 15 executive departments, and the heads of all of those there are 15 executive departments, and the heads of all of those departments form the president's cabinet along with the vice president. And what the cabinet does is it advises the president. So members of the cabinet all have specialized knowledge in various different fields, and they're experts in their fields, and the president just kind of has more generalized knowledge and is making decisions on a wide range of different topics. So the president will go to cabinet officials to seek advice based on their knowledge in their areas of expertise. So you're going to need to know 2 different cabinet level positions. As I said before, there are 15 cabinet offices you can choose from. So there is Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary of Commerce, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Education, Secretary of Energy, Secretary of Health and Human Services, Secretary of Homeland Security, Secretary of the Interior, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Secretary of Labor, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Transportation, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of Veterans Affairs, the Attorney General, and the Vice President. Now, if you want to make this a little bit easier on yourself, I would recommend memorizing Attorney General and Vice President, just because for your interview, you're already going to have to know a little bit about the Vice President, and Attorney General is a position you probably will see pretty frequently in the news. It is definitely an important and powerful position, or you can choose any other 2 of these. So make sure you get 2 written down. And now we're going to move on to the current president and vice president of the U.S. So as I'm sure you know, our current president is Donald Trump, who is in the Republican Party, and our current vice president is Mike Pence, who is also in the Republican Party. So you're going to have to know their names for your test. Okay, so now that we've gone over all that new information, we're just going to go ahead and get started on a quick quiz to just keep it in your memory. So if you could try to do this without looking at your notes, that's great, but if you want to look at them, also fine. And you can just go ahead and write the answer down on a piece of paper, or you can say it out loud, or just think it in your head, whatever you want to do as I'm reading these questions. So question 1, who is in charge of the executive branch? If you said the president, you are correct. We elect a president for how many years? The answer is 4 years. In what month do we vote for president? We vote for president in November. How old do citizens have to be to vote for president? citizens have to be 18 years old or older. If the president can no longer serve, who becomes president? The vice president will become president. If the vice president as well as the president can no longer serve, who becomes president? In this case, the Speaker of the House would become president. Who is the commander-in-chief of the military? If you said the president, you are correct. Who signs bills to become laws? The answer is the president. And who vetoes bills? This one is also the president. What does the president's cabinet do? The president's cabinet advises the president. What are 2 cabinet-level positions? So any of these 15 positions, you just have to remember 2. Almost all of them start with Secretary of, except these 2 at the bottom here. So just whatever 2 of those maybe sound the most familiar to you or are the easiest to remember. So any 2. What is the name of the President of the United States now? The answer is Donald Trump. And as I said, we have a presidential election coming up in November. So if you're taking your test after that time, just keep an eye out on the news. I'm sure you'll know if there's a new president, but yeah, you'll have to alter that answer if you take the test and the president changes. Okay, what is the name of the Vice President of the United States now? Answer is Michael or Mike Pence. What is the political party of the president now? Donald Trump is a member of the Republican Party. Okay, so now that we've come to the end of the information we will be learning on the executive branch of our federal government, we're going to get into a citizen tip, which is just a little tip on how to be an effective citizen and a positive member of our nation. So our tip is going to be to vote. So why is voting important? Basically, the whole idea of democracy is built on the belief that people should govern themselves. So voting is the most powerful way that you can influence leaders and policy, and it's also something that will allow you to control the laws and rules that you ultimately must obey. Voting allows you to hold politicians accountable for their actions. So when you agree with what a politician is doing, voting in their favor is a good way to signal your support of their actions. And when politicians are making decisions that you don't believe in, when a mass group of people votes against that politician, they ultimately end up out of office, and a signal is sent to other politicians that they should not adopt that position that you don't believe in. Also, politicians want to stay in office. That's the bottom line for most politicians. They want to keep their jobs, so they will shape policy around what their voters want. So voting is kind of your way of ensuring that politicians are actually representing you instead of just representing, their personal interests and what they personally believe. Okay, so as you learned in this lesson, you do need to be a citizen who is 18 years old or older to vote. But once you become a citizen, you are going to need to register to vote in order to be eligible. So to register online, you can go to vote.usa.gov. You can also print out the voter registration form. You can find it online, or you can find it in public places like libraries, government buildings, places like that. Schools sometimes have them. And you just fill that out with some information about yourself, like your address. You're going to need like an ID number, some other information, a political party. So then you fill that out and you mail it in to the location for your state that'll be listed on the form. You can also register to vote at the DMV, an Army recruitment office, a state or county public assistance office, like a food stamps office. Any of those places are places that you can register to vote, and you can also register to vote in a variety of English languages other than English that are listed here. Okay. So then just a reminder, your vote does make a difference. It's a common perception in our country that, my individual vote doesn't really matter. My one vote isn't going to change anything. But the reality is that only 60% of eligible voters vote in presidential election years, and only 40% vote in midterms. So a lot of Americans are not voting on a regular basis. But if you don't vote, you don't even give elected officials the chance to take your opinions into account. In a democracy, change is only accomplished when a large number of people recognize the importance of voting and vote for the policies and politicians that they believe in. Additionally, something to keep in mind is that most people who vote regularly are richer, older, and more partisan than your average person, because those groups are either more motivated to vote, or they just simply have more time and more access to voting. And what this does is it skews election results, and it makes it so that our politicians are going to be voting to represent these groups more so than they will be voting to represent the average American. So it's really important, particularly if you are not a part of these groups, to keep in mind that the voting population is skewed in favor of groups like that. And so it's important that you add alternative voices into the mix. Okay. So now that we've finished our lesson on the executive branch and we've gone over a citizen tip of voting, this is the place where I would ask if anybody has any questions on what we just learned. But of course, we are not in person, so if you do have questions, feel free to email us at missioncitizen@gmail.com, or you can call our number that you can find on our website at www.missioncitizen.org, and we would be happy to get back to you. But otherwise, thank you for listening to this lesson, and we'll see you next time.